those who don't know me, I'm Jim Clevenger, and I have been asked to be the moderator for this meeting. I will do my best not to revert out of old habits back to being a lecturer, but that's not, that won't have that. It's nice to see so many people here, and welcome to this dialogue about humanism. We hope that at the end of the next 2 hours, you'll come away with a greater understanding of what humanism is and what it is not. So I'll just outline for you very briefly the way the structure of the meeting will work. And remember, this is a dialogue. It's neither a lecture nor a debate. It is meant to illuminate through question and response the issue at hand, which of course is what is humanism. So first, Mark Phillips, who is the leader of the Philosophy of Social Change group in the Shrewsbury U3A, and also the inspirer of this meeting, will make a very brief introduction about the nature and purpose of Platonic dialogue. Then Simon Nightingale, who is the chairman of the Shropshire Humanitarian Association, will make a 20-minute introduction to humanism. He'll be followed by Mike Curtis, who's the first of our 2 interlocutors, and he'll make a 15-minute contribution to the dialogue. Then Simon will have 5 minutes to respond to points made by Mike, and Mike a further 5 moments, up to 5 moments, to make a further contribution. Chris Stoddart, the second of our interlocutors, will then make a 15-minute contribution to the dialogue, followed by a response from Simon and a response from Chris. And then I'll throw the dialogue open to brief questions from the floor. We should have about half an hour for that. And if time permits, on the questions to have any further points that Simon or Mike and Chris would like to make. And finally, I'll ask Mark Phillips to make a brief closing remark about what we have achieved in the course of this meeting. And I'll then close with an invitation for us to continue discussions, if you wish, in the cafe over coffee. So, without further ado, I'll introduce Mark Phillips, who just to give an indication of what the Platonic dialogue is all about.
It's a bit of an outrage, really, that I'm having to do this, because I thought, having come up with the idea of doing this, and asked Jim to do the introductions and things, that I wasn't going to have to do anything else. So he suddenly sprung this on me. But in the philosophy group that I jointly lead, we're trying to grapple with ideas. We read stuff, and we're trying to educate ourselves, trying to learn something about what the ideas are all about. The dialogue today is very much based on what I, somewhat ignorantly imagined to be Plato's idea in his dialogues. The idea broadly seems to be that you have somebody presents an idea, and rather than other people trying to knock the idea down and say what a ridiculous idea is, you have a vote and that idea is killed, stone dead. The idea is that what we have to say about almost anything contains some usefulness, and the process of discussion hopefully is educational for all parties. We try to extract what is useful in an idea, discard what isn't useful, and improve it. And really that's the intention of this. Humanism was a subject of a presentation by Simon at U3A, and attracted a lot of interest. And it seemed to me that there was a lot in it that could be explored in a slightly more philosophical way. The structure of this is slightly formalised, but the idea is that it's rather less than a debate. It's a different thing from a debate, because we're not starting with a proposition which has to be either accepted or rejected. we're starting with an idea which we want to explore. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Mark. Good. Okay, with that a little bit of introduction to what we're going to do, I would like for Simon to carry on. I think the sun can come around this side, so if you could hand it through, that would be great. Introduce Simon Nightingale to speak to us about humanism.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me. Whatever the outcome, I am not drinking hemlock, so those of you who've come just to see that, yeah, my namesake Florence Nightingale wrote a book called Nursing What It Is and What It Is Not. So I'm going to start by saying what I'm not going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about religion, except when necessary to contrast with humanism. I'm not going to talk about the existence of God of gods. Now, when I say I'm a humanist, what does that mean? Well, the soundbite that you may be familiar with is a humanist believes you can lead a good life and be a good person without religion. Now, a lot of philosophers here, and you're saying that's all very well. You say you believe this, what evidence do you have? You say you can lead a good life. What is it to lead a good life? I mean, this goes back to Aristotle and eudaimonia and happiness studies and positive psychology. You say you can be a good person. How does a humanist know what is good and bad, right and wrong without a Bible, a Quran, and so on? And you say you live without religion, but isn't humanism just another religion? So, we're going to be talking about some of these aspects, particularly the philosophical aspects, rather less about the sort of day-to-day aspects of humanism, such as secularism, human rights, ceremonies, church, faith schools, and so on. So firstly, what sort of thing is humanism? It is, nowadays we talk about belief systems, life stances, worldviews, and these can be religious, Hindu, Christian, Judaism, or they can be non-religious, of which humanism is perhaps the most well known, but you could include Confucianism and Stoicism. There's a bit of a grey area in the middle, because there are some people who've moved from religion, from classical Buddhism, or from Quakers, secular Quakers, or Seal Faith Anglicans, who are probably closer to humanism. So, if you have to define religion, if you define it too narrow, it's not very helpful. If you define it too wide, then the Women's Institute, or U3A, the U3A would be a religion. I mean, maybe we are. Maybe we believe in heaven, which, as you know, means life after retirement. There's no single factor that defines religion. You've got to think of sort of a Wittgenstein family resemblance. So a religion usually includes belief in God or gods, heaven, hell, limbo, purgatory, a holy text, Bible, Quran, and so on. Rules or doctrines, literally or figuratively carved in stone, liturgies, passions of worship, and usually founding figures, Jesus, Muhammad, Moses, usually male, and leaders, Pope, bishops, imams, usually male. Ladies present may be wondering whether religions were invented by men for men. I think they may be right. Now, if you don't believe any of that, if you don't believe particularly in God, then you're an atheist. Nothing more, nothing less. It does not mean you're a humanist. Let me explain. There was a time in my life between losing my Christian faith and becoming an atheist when I did call myself, and becoming a humanist, I did call myself an atheist. And I went around telling people with faith that everything they thought was important was a load of rubbish. And these are people who are much nicer and happier than I was. I feel really embarrassed about it now. But they were very nice, and to their great credit, we remained friends. And it was after going to a humanist funeral about 20 years ago that I realised you shouldn't be defined by what you don't believe, but by what you do believe. I don't believe in Father Christmas. I don't want to be categorised as an Father Christmasist. So I found out about humanism and realised it is a philosophy of life with positive beliefs and values. My attitude to religion changed as well. I came to realise that those with faith saw their religion as making them happier and better people. They saw the same in their families and their communities. I just believed that as a humanist I could do the same. It's not easy, but they don't find it easy either, but we do it because it's important. Okay, so very quickly, how common is humanism? The latest surveys, and these are pretty robust, show that 53% of the population have no religion. And for young people, school leavers, it's 70%, over 70%. Among those who say they have no religion, the large majority hold humanist beliefs, which I'll talk about in a moment. Of those who call themselves Christian, less than 50% believe that Jesus was a real person, died, came back to life, and was the Son of God. That's not 50% of everybody, or 50% of the non-believers. That's 50% of the people who call themselves Christian. So they are Christian, but not in the religious sense. They're Christian in the cultural sense, of which I'm a cultural Christian. I love carols and Christmas and what's not to like. Okay, just a bit of pedantic definitions here. I like pedantry. Bertrand Russell said he liked people calling him a pedant because in his book, a pedant was someone who wanted his expressed opinions to be correct, and too. So when I say belief, I mean an assertion that something is true. There may be evidence, there may not. So, for example, believing in fairies, no evidence. Believing 2 and 2 is 4, axiomatic. Believing in evolution, overwhelming evidence. To have faith in something is to assert something is true with little or no evidence. So for me, that would be believing in God, or homeopathy, or miracles. Somebody usually gets upset when I say that. And it's not God or miracles. Okay. To have blind faith is to assert that a statement is true in the evidence, in the face of evidence to the contrary. So, for example, somebody believed the world was flat, or that they were a young Earth creationist. Okay, so what do we believe? I told you what we don't believe. The most important thing we believe is naturalism. What time do I have to start? Okay. So, when I first told my children that I was a humanist and about naturalism, they got confused with naturalism and naturism, and they thought they were going to have to go on family nudist camp holidays. But there's no nudity in humanism, at least not in Shropshire. So naturalism is the belief that only natural laws and natural forces apply in the world. No ghosts, no ghouls, no gremlins. Now, in contrast, most religions believe in a hidden celestial realm with gods and angels and spiritual forces. Humanist beliefs are naturalistic. We believe that everything in the universe can be explained or is at least explainable. We believe that nothing in the universe is out of bounds for science, although some things are beyond our abilities. Claims without sufficient evidence of speculation are not credible. We say the only reality is what we can detect with our senses, which is known as empiricism. So it follows that we don't believe in life after death. Again, almost all religions believe in life after death, some sort of life, and some believe in life before death. Some believe in hell, fire and damnation. Our beliefs are rather more benign. We think that everything we are, everything we experience, everything other people experience about us comes from here. And when the electrochemical changes are irreversibly lost, we stop. Now, as a humanist, I believe the best way to find things out is by studying that thing, by observing, investigating, and experimenting, and then I come up with an idea, and obviously it's my idea, I look for things that confirm it, but more importantly, I look for things that refute it or cause me to change it or tweak it a bit. And this, of course, is known as the scientific method. It's the constant challenging and testing of our ideas that's so important. And it's what we call discovered truth. Because discovered truth doesn't claim to be the ultimate truth. It's moving towards truth. With new discoveries, our hypotheses change. And that's very unlike religious truth. So Aristotle's ideas about the world changed to those of Galileo, Isaac Newton, Albert Einstein, and then the wonderful weird world of quantum mechanics with Max Planck. So for humanists, there are two basic sources of knowledge. Firstly, axiomatic, maths and logic, also called analytical, a priori, necessary. And then there's the discovered truths, also called scientific method, synthetic, a posteriori, and contingent. Different philosophers use slightly different terms and slightly different senses. Now you might say it's all pretty obvious because we see the effects of science all the time, the benefits and the harms. But some people believe there are other sources of truth, for example, revealed truth, revealed from holy texts. Now there's another sort of revealed truth, revealed by personal experience. Humanists also have personal experiences that come to us unbidden and unexpected, and they can be very wonderful, but we think these revelations come from in here, rather than from some ultimate source of truth out there. And of course, revealed truth and discovered truth are at odds. There are many cautionary tales. A long time ago, before we had the scientific method, people believed creation myths about everything story they believed because the story was written in a book or they were told it was true. Now we have a choice. We can believe the creation stories, or we can choose to believe what science has shown us, believe what we're told, or what we discover for ourselves. So science has shown us evolution, standard model of physics, new synthesis biology. These are discovered truth, as opposed to revealed truth in a religious text or by revelation. It's an extraordinary statistic that 40% of Americans are young Earth creationists and believe the world was created, the universe was created, much as it is now, 6,000 years ago. Now, it's those same people who believe that a property developer who's got millions of pounds and has a personality disorder would make a good president. Science doesn't have all the answers, obviously, and that's very important to stress. People look to science. You've got the answers? No. We have the best hypothesis so far. We're moving towards the truth. There's a lot of things we can't explain. These are the gaps in our knowledge. And when we come across gaps, we say, oh, that's interesting. Let's try and fill in that gap. Whereas religious people say, well, that's due to God. And when we explain that, they find another gap and they say God's there. This is called the God of the gaps. So that's all I'm going to say about the sort of epistemological side of humanism, about where we get our knowledge. I'm now going to talk about morality. Now, one of the commonest questions I'm asked when I go to talk to faith groups or interfaith groups is, where do humanists get their morals? I mean, are you moral relativists in the bad sense? They also ask, and I think this is very revealing, they say, even if you can work out the right thing to do, why do you bother? Which sort of means that they're doing it for some personal reason, some gain for themselves, or to prevent eternity in hellfire and damnation. And eternity is a very long time, particularly towards the end. As would you. Okay, so morals, where do they come from? Are we born basically good, and then some of us are sort of perverted by our environment, corrupted? Or are we born basically bad, original sin, and need redemption? Or this was popular until perhaps the last 30, 40 years. Are we born without moral beliefs, like a blank slate? But if that's the case, where does the writing on the blank slate later come from? Now, I'm a neurologist and neuroscientist, and I'm very aware that we're born with brains that have built-in programs. So you get a computer, it comes loaded with Windows. Not Williams. Loaded with Windows. So, for example, we have programs for speaking languages. Which language we speak depends on what language we hear. And the same way, we're born with innate morality. And this has been extremely well studied. It's an area of psychology and philosophy called moral foundation theory. We're born with compassion. And you see that in animals. We're born with a sense of fairness and justice. And that's very, very important among animals. We have a sense of obeying authority, need to obey authority. Again, you see that in animals, pecking orders and the leader of the pack and so on. We tend to form in-group loyalty, groups with intense in-group loyalty, and like many animals we have taboos, mainly about food and sex and cleanliness. So, if morality is a human construct, it's to be found in here, rather than some external source of wisdom. This morality that we have, it varies from person to person. Some people have a very strong moral sense, some a bad moral sense, the far end, a lot of men with psychopathic personalities who really cause a great deal of trouble, particularly when they become hedge fund managers or politicians. So if you have a biological variation, a normal distribution, you've got to work out what causes that variation. And in fact, 40%, it can only be two things, nature and nurture, and a combination of the two. 40% of the variation, okay, in our moral nature is genetic, and this is done from very robust twin studies. So morality is considerably inherited. I'll just give you a very quick example of a test of moral intelligence, and let's see how you do. Now, some of you may have heard this before, forgive me. A man steals into a pharmacy, or breaks into a pharmacy to steal drugs. How do we feel about that? Well, it's a no-brainer. He's a madman. Hopefully the police will catch him and stop him doing it again and punish him maybe. So then we change the story. The man who breaks in is stealing an anti-cancer drug for his wife to save her life. The pharmacist is charging £2,000 for a drug that only costs £20. The man breaks in, takes the drugs, £20 worth, leaves £40 for the pharmacist, mends the window on the way out. And we're all a little different, aren't we? Our gut reactions, we have sympathy for the man and his wife. A little bit of sympathy for the pharmacist because he's been broken into, but not a great deal of sympathy. So if you're an ethicist, without any recourse to Bibles, you would say, we might consider the outcomes for everybody involved, the man, his wife, the pharmacist, and society in general, what you might call consequentialism. This is Bentham and John Stuart Mill. But on the other hand, we have a basic right not to be robbed, and that's part of human rights, Thomas Paine and John Locke. If you don't want to be robbed, you shouldn't rob other people. That's mutuality, a psychological principle that's found in all animals. The golden rule, which has been around for 2,500 years, the first records of it in Egyptian writing. Also, in a civilized society, we have a duty to obey laws, even laws we don't personally like, and that's sort of getting into deontology with Immanuel Kant. And then we should also think about what's in the mind of the man who steals the drugs. Is he taking them to sell to kids in the playground, or is he trying to do the right thing? And that's called virtue ethics, which was big to Aristotle and has been sort of revitalized by more modern philosophers like Elizabeth Anscombe. Now, it doesn't actually matter what you individually decide about the rights and wrongs of the man breaking in. What's important is that you recognize the complexity of the situation, that it's not black and white. If you asked a psychopath, he'd say, well, he broke in, he broke the law, I can't see any problem, you know, he's just good. He doesn't see the complexity of it, and you do, because you're morally sophisticated. And the important thing is you recognize this without necessarily studying philosophy or ethics or having read it in a book. And you certainly didn't get all that from a holy book. I mean, thou shalt not steal. It's a good start, but it doesn't really cover all the basics, does it? And of course the idea that moral law is just God's law isn't very logical. For is it better to do what you've been told in order to please God and increase your chances of staying out of hell? Or is it better to do good because it's the right thing to do? Another dialogue, Euthyphro dialogue. 2,000 years ago, Socrates asks Euthyphro, is an action good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's good? Euthyphro's dilemma is that if it's good because God says it is, then if God tells us to, say, slaughter our enemies, women and children and all, as he does in quite a few places in the Old Testament, then merciless slaughter is a good thing, which is morally repugnant. On the other hand, if God only tells you to do things that are good, then that, Socrates says, that makes God a little bit redundant. I would agree. In fact, most people think they can work out right from wrong without religion. So what humanists are saying here is that biology and culture have created our moral sense. That rather than religion giving us morality, our natural moral instincts, for example, the golden rule, have sometimes been adopted by religion and claimed as their own. No?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, well, Well, I'm going to give you a summary now. Now, this summary, I was asked to go to a school earlier this year with a multi-faith panel, and I had to talk about humanism for 2 minutes at the beginning. And I'm going to read you what I said, and I'll give you a copy. And I might say all the other religious groups just sort of witted on about being nice to people, which is good, but it didn't really tell anybody much. Okay, so in 2 minutes. In a nutshell, humanists believe you can lead a good life and be a good person without religion, without belief in the supernatural, God or gods. We don't have a holy book like the Christian Bible or the Muslim Quran. We get our knowledge from studying the way we are and the world around us. That means we believe in evolution rather than creationism, science rather than mystery, reason rather than superstition, understanding rather than prejudice. We believe that human morality comes from us, not some ultimate source of truth out there that we have to discover. Morality is partly something we're all born with, and partly something we work out for ourselves. That's called normative ethics, and it's been around since the ancient Greeks. Humanists feel that a moral philosophy based on knowledge and reason is better than a theology based on divine revelation or holy books written hundreds or thousands of years ago, and priests to interpret the holy books for us. Having said all that, the values we arrive at from humanism are not so different from the values of most moderate religions. We value compassion and fairness and respect. And although we live without religion, we're not against religion. And indeed, humanists fight for the right of everyone to live the lives they want and to believe what they want. We have a sense of awe and wonder as we contemplate this incredible world around us. But as we only have the one life, we know that we must live life well and help others to do the same. Recent surveys have shown that over half the population, 52% of the UK, live without religion. And although not all call themselves humanists, a large majority believe what humanists believe. Among school leavers, the percentage living without religion is over 70%. That's why humanism is taught alongside other worldviews in RE lessons, because linking being good with belief in God is not much help for those who live without religion. Many of us with humanist belief form local, national and international groups to support our members, for example, ceremonies, pastoral care, and campaign for human rights, including those of religious people, and campaign against harm by anyone, religious or not. So that's a 2-minute summary, and if anybody wants a copy, pass it on. That's my introduction.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think you've done a very good job of illuminating what is and what is not humanism. Now I'll ask Mike to come up and make a contribution to the dialogue. I'll set a time of 15 minutes here, right? Okay?
I started off writing a set of notes and then expanded them and turned into a great essay. Well, best not to just sit and read it out. I am a nerd, you know, I'm into computers. So I've got a different viewpoint from that. And it is the fact that humanism, it's in the name, is all about human beings that I want to consider at least and possibly question. There's a very good book, recently by his name right, Yuval Noah Harari. Some of you may have read it. It's called, he read two, but this one's Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow. One of the points he makes is that humanism, he believes, is the most common belief system of our time. It encompassing, you know, people who are, say they're religious or are religious, but still consider that. And he says it's backed by science, but he believes that science is actually sort of taking over. That now ideas such as free will can actually be boiled down to something like a computer program running in the brain. And he believes really that humanism is morphing into a form of scientism. There's a lot of isms, aren't there? But you ought to play ism bingo. I've got a few more coming up. I don't subscribe to that. But there's a point here. Philosophers have talked about what we mean by consciousness, intelligence, sentience for centuries, Socrates and on. And still, essentially, nobody knows. Nobody has any definition of what it is to be conscious, what it is to be intelligent, what it is to be sentient. We know that we as human beings are all three of those. But that's all we know. And various theories, Cartesian dualism and the modern things like behavioralism and functionalism all try and explain it, but there's no overwhelming idea of what it is. And in that case, it's tempting to say, well, these are human qualities. Humans have them, nothing else does. But it's not the only way of looking at it. I mean, that way sort of sees human beings as being separate from everything else. The old religious idea that humans were set up as dominion over everything else. They were separate, they weren't really part of the world. And sort of evolution has sort of changed that a bit. We now see ourselves as part of that, but there were other ways of looking at it which see us even more as part of the world, as part of a continuum, of a spectrum of consciousness, intelligence, that we're not really separate at all. And the particular thing that's encouraging all this thing, that's come to light recently is the idea of artificial intelligence. It's all over the news, as you know. Somebody says it's impossible, it'll never happen. Somebody says it'll be a few centuries away. Other people say, well, we've got it already. And others say, well, in a few years' time, and we will have genuine artificial beings. In that sort of situation, the safest thing to assume is that sometime in the future we will make something which is artificially intelligent. Well, when we do that, most people object to that idea, and the goalposts tend to move. There was a time when we said chess was a really complicated activity. If a machine could play chess, then it would be really intelligent. And then, of course, they built chess-playing computers. You've probably got one in your pocket at the moment that's about grandmaster level, could beat you any time with the plan. But then we said they cheated. They didn't play the right way. They didn't have a plan, they didn't have a strategy. They just worked out every possibility and chose the best one. But then, recently, computers beat the world champion at Go. Now, I don't know much about Go, I don't know you know much about the game of Go, but what I do know is it's way too complicated. There are way too many possibilities for even the most powerful computer to actually play that in the same way they play chess. They can't plan ahead. They have to play it the same way that humans do. And in fact, the machine that actually won, beat the world champion at Go, wasn't actually programmed to play Go. It was taught to play Go. That was it. It just played and learned from the play, just the same way a human being would. So, is that intelligent? You probably have spoken to computers. You ring up some of these call centres, what answers is a computer? A few years ago, it was a laugh. You could tell from reading they were all very funny. These days, probably you can't tell. When Siri first started answering the phone, you could always trick them. My PC sits on my desk, and every few minutes, Cortana brings up the screen because it's heard something in the background that it thinks it's speaking to it. It messes everything up. They're the very early technology. They've got to get much better than that. So we might, if we're not careful, end up with a situation where intelligent machines are discussing among themselves whether human beings are still intelligent, are really intelligent, or whether we're just animals, if we're not careful. So we have to consider the fact that we can. So back to the point about humanism, a racist discriminates on the grounds of race, a sexist on the basis of sex. So as a humanist, actually discriminating on the grounds of being human. And everything we talk about is about humans, human morality. But what about everything else? Let's look at what might be the case in, it's difficult to say how much, because some people say 5 years, some people say 50 years. But at some point in the future, you may have two beings. One that was born or perhaps decanted out of a test tube, is essentially basically human being, but their joints will be replaced by something that's much better. They've got an artificial heart, they've got implants in their brain so that they can access directly networks and things like that, and they're very much an augmented and better humanity. On the other hand, we have an almost identical being which was built. It's got all mechanical parts as well. Perhaps it's got some organic parts. We can actually build organics. We can print livers. Even these days, we can build these organic parts. So it may run organic parts. Is one a human being and the other not? Do they have the same rights as each other, or not? And we carry on further. If we accept that the one that's been built has the same rights and has the same morality and ethics as the one that was born, then what if it's more like a machine? If it's not a human in front of you, but scattered about with its bits in different machines? What about if the human being has been genetically modified so it can live in a space habitat on the Mars colony? If people are going to successfully live on Mars, and they're talking about doing that in the next decade or so, and people, if they have a colony there, people are going to be born there, they're going to be genetically different from us here because they're in a totally different environment. And they will probably be modified to survive in that environment. So, at what point would they cease to become human beings? This is quite a problem. And as long as we might discover life that's not from Earth. Most scientists these days actually believe that life that did not originate on Earth has already been found. But it's such a momentous discovery that they're not really announcing it because the evidence is not quite good enough to actually satisfy every criteria. But most of them believe that that's just a matter of time before that happens. And then we're going to, what happens then? All right, if we discover an alien that's flying around with spaceships and has got their equivalent iPhone in their hand, right, that's an intelligent alien. They might be technological. They might just sit on their planet and think deep thoughts. We don't know. We have absolutely no idea. Our only model is human. If they're not like us, are they intelligent? Do they have morals? Do they have ethics? Should we treat them as being human beings? So, when we consider things like humanism, my view, I think, is that humanism needs to change, needs to develop. It needs not to be talking so much about humanity, about humans. And that we really ought to be concentrating a bit more about the fundamental ideas of how we say that something is intelligent, how we say that something is sentient. We share the Earth with many other species, and we are only just really beginning to discover just how intelligent, how sentient these creatures actually are. We still have absolutely no idea how clever dolphins are, for example. Even the ones we know all the time, dogs, we really do not know how much they are. I mean, people in Parliament, who really know what they're doing, can vote and say that they don't have feelings. That doesn't doesn't mean they don't have feelings. We all know they do have feelings. There's a modern theories of consciousness, some modern theories which are just really just at the beginning. There's one called the integrated information theory, starting at the New York Center of Sleep and Mind, I think it's called. And we talk about everything really in terms of information processing and information flow. There aren't really business matter facilities before humanism, everything is in terms of information. And everything can hold information. A stone has information. It's got information about how it was formed, where it came from, what's happened to it in the meantime. It's got some sort of information. Plants have a lot more information. They have some form of, not exactly sentience, but they do have things in them which look very much like nervous systems. That's before we get on to animals. So there is this spectrum, this very wide range of things that process information, that use energy and everything else, of which we, the human beings, just have to be one bit, one part. Currently, currently we think we're the really important ones. The rest don't really matter, it's us, everything else. And we don't really know how important these other bits are. We're now constructing bits that may well be as intelligent, as important as. So we need, if we must have some sort of belief system, we really ought to be looking at belief systems that have a much wider viewpoint than simply what human beings think and do.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Right, now I'd like to ask Simon to take up the 5 minutes to
I have 5 minutes to comment on each of his points. No?
5 minutes.
All of them? Oh, God. Okay. Firstly, humanism is about humans. I mean, it's about how we know things, we have morals, how we should behave. It is about humans. U3A is a terrible organisation because it doesn't involve children. Okay, humanism is about humans, but I agree that it's not just about humans. And if you go on any humanist website, look at any humanist philosophers, they're interested in animal welfare and the environment and most other sensible things. We're not just concerned about humans. That's the first thing. Secondly, we have scientism. Now, scientism is, some people think it's a good thing, the fact that we try to discover truth rather than reveal truth. We use science, logical positivism, empiricism. Other people say, no, science is trying to get into areas where they shouldn't. There are certain areas that are unknowable by science, but anything that's unknowable is almost always because it's indefinable or indescribable. And as the great man said, "Woran man nicht sprechen kann, darüber muss man schweigen." The last words of Tractatus by Wittgenstein, that of which you cannot speak, you must remain silent. So if it's unknowable, you can just forget it. So that's scientism. Then we've got animalism. Now, animalism is a criticism that humans think they are special, speciesism. That we're so much different from other animals that we should consider ourselves quite separate from them. But most of the reasons people like consciousness, tool use, a theory of mind, and all those other things which we had and animals didn't, we've now found that higher primates, certainly other animals, have. So I think there is a sort of graduation, and there is a huge quantitative difference, but probably no qualitative difference, except for one thing, that is we have such extraordinary consciousness and introspection that we can look at our lives and make choices that are not due to innate instincts. Almost all animals, apart from humans and a few of the higher primates, have no culture. Everything they do is innate. If that animal is brought up without any other animals and then they're put into the world, they'll carry on much the same. They haven't learnt it from anybody, it's innate. And we do. So I think that is one very big difference between us. But animalists would say, that there are some human beings with damaged brains who are less intelligent, less emotional, less feeling than many higher animals. So if we afford personhood to this child with severe cerebral palsy and the rights that go with personhood, maybe we should to higher primates as well. And that is a very good question which I think humans are going to have to address. The next question was singularity. Will there come a time when computers design themselves so fast and so rapid that there is a shoot away, an escalation, exponential improvement? Almost certainly there will. This was first proposed by John von Neumann, the great mathematician and scientist, about 50 years ago. Then we come on to transhumanism. Transhumanism is when we are linked to computers. Now, the human brain is unbelievably complex. The human brain has more possible connections than all the stars in the entire universe, 160 billion light years across. We are that complex, but we are slow. Neurons work at the speed of 50 meters a second at best. Computers work at 2/3 of the speed of light, 2 million times faster. So combining a fast computer that's already generated through many generations, plus our brain, we will seem like gods, except there aren't any gods. Okay.
Just another minute.
What?
Just another month.
Okay, so that's transhuman, posthumanism when we download it onto a computer, that is science fiction. Dataism, there is a movement now to look at the world in forms of data. It's an interesting way of looking at the world, but it doesn't tell you about football, love, or hemorrhoids. And I think perhaps I'll stop there. I hope that answers the question.
Mike, if you'd like to say something more for 3 or 4 minutes, that would be
okay. Yes, all this is true, but things do change. And the rate of, you probably fell over hearing this, the rate of change is exponential, but it's difficult for anybody who's not actually a mathematician to really understand what an exponential rate of change means. It means the changes that we've seen in our lifetime are going to, that amount of change is going to be happening in the next 5-10 years. And then an equivalent amount again in the next couple of years. Things that really are changing. And we can say that humanism, well yes, humanism is about humans, yes, absolutely. In 10 years' time, maybe a couple of robots sitting back and saying, boy, what about us? Don't we have morals? Don't we have ethics? In fact, at the moment, we are trying to define, trying to build these things. If they are going to be moral beings, then it's going to be up to us to sort of set them out on that path. And we are gods in that sort of sense. We're on the verge, possibly, it's all possible, none of this is certain, but possibly on the verge of actually creating new life, new intelligent beings. And yet we don't fully understand what we mean morality, ethics, where it all comes from, what it is. We can't agree on it. Our versions of morality and ethics are different from the ones you find in other parts of the world and other cultures, and it's all very interdependent. And I think my view really is that when you try and bring these things together into any sort of belief system, then you're immediately restricting what it is you think about. No matter how broad you actually try and make that system, in the end, there is some sort of division involved between us and them, the ones that are in the system, the ones that are out of the system. And I would prefer to see that we have something that encompasses not just our humanity, but everything as well. Personally, I don't see the need for a belief system. I am not an ist. I'm not anything ist. I don't need it. I don't want it. I don't want to be called anything ist. And I still enjoy seeing the sunshine and the sun outside, the leaves blowing and everything else. I appreciate art and music and everything. Absolutely. I don't need any of this. I still live what I think is a moral life. I still believe I'm an ethical being and I behave ethically. But I don't need any belief system to make me do that. So I query the need for belief systems, and I particularly query the need for belief systems when they do separate in any way, even if it's all humanity from humanity.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call on Chris Stoddart, who will make a 15-minute contribution to the dialogue.
If I last that long, yes. Yes, well, where to start? Back in 1078, Anselm, who was the Bishop of Canterbury at the time, proposed the ontological argument about God by saying that if it's that in which nothing greater can be thought, but once you've created that thought, it exists in the mind and you have to address it, and it exists in the mind even of those who don't believe it. And in a sense, that's what we're doing today. We're trying to come to terms with something which doesn't go away simply by saying, I don't believe it. Now, philosophers over many times have been trying to distinguish how we view the world as it seems and how we deal with the transcendental, which is the idea that you go so far and there always seems to be something further, something we don't quite get, if you like. And he accepts that the reasoning over time is valid in the sense that we have developed in various ways through to evolutionary psychology today that points to the basic truth that religion is a natural phenomenon like anything else. But what he says is that it doesn't deal with the issue of the sacred. He says there is something more than just mere logical interpretation. And he says, well, what is it? What is it to see something sacred? And he likens it to the comparison of music in the form of a sheet of black and white squiggles and music itself. A tone-deaf technician, he would say, could create with the aid of Mike's marvellous computers music. But a tone-deaf technician would have no knowledge of the music. It would simply be produced, but it would mean nothing. And it's that additional meaning that goes beyond the scientific interpretation. This is the music I've produced from these squiggles. That is something which takes us beyond, perhaps out of ourselves in a way, to kind of grapple with the reality that is around us. The sacred roots ourselves in a place that's meant to be for the present and for the future. There's something slightly limited in the humanist view that seems to sort of start and end like death. That's it, it's all gone. And I think we do better when we think of ourselves in the continuum of what comes next is just as important as what came before, and our brief existence is more significant for that idea. I'm trying to deal with this without reading it out. When you go into a church or a place that was sacred to others, or sacred once to others that no longer are around, it always seems to me, when I'm in that kind of frame of mind, to be more intense than, say, a casual encounter in various places. In other words, there's a kind of deep-seated respect for those that have found some meaning in their lives in the place that you are now standing in, whether it's somewhere in Jerusalem or whether it's somewhere else. When I was out there, we once tracked down a small cave up in the northern area, not far from Tiberias. We meet out locals to find these things, and we went down some little steps into a cave that had been formed, And it was just a very simple space, rather like an enormous egg with a carved seat all the way around where you could sit. And it was the remnants of some French monks who'd gone out there and settled in this part of Israel, and probably Palestine at the time, over that. And it was meaningful to sit there and say, well, I know nothing about these people who form this space, but for them it meant something, and it seemed significant to me to be in contemplative respect of that and think, what does it mean to me? I think these things are more significant than Simon might suggest. Roger Scruton also makes a similar argument about art. Art is a collection of colours. It is slowly being formed in front of your eyes, and it isn't until the final dot is put into a particular part of the picture that it starts to mean something. But it means different things to different people. So there is an assumption in the scientific approach, as yes, we know it's all different, but you don't know what's going on in somebody else's head. And by communicating through the sense of the sacred, I think we can come together in a more meaningful way than it simply being a matter of deduction, which seems to lead us more down the political path, which today it's hard to view with a great deal of confidence. Aristotle talked about the idea of eudaimonia, which Simon referred to, which is not the idea, it's not really about happiness as such, it's about flourishing, about the idea of leading the virtuous life and flourishing in the process of doing so. He even extrapolated that idea to say, well, what happens after you've gone, after you've died, will affect that state of being. In other words, you have a responsibility looking forward. And this issue of the afterlife, often presented through religions in possibly an unhelpful way to us now, hasn't disappeared just because we don't believe the spiritual idea. What Samuel Scheffler argues is that the afterlife, in terms of what happens after we're not here, the continuation of humanity, the continuation of even this planet, is more significant than we like to think about, because we don't actually think about it very much. And this isn't just about the slightly more self-interested idea of our own genetic continuum with children, grandchildren, and all the rest of it, if we are in that lucky position. It's a bit bigger than that. If we genuinely thought the planet, for some cataclysmic event was about to happen, was going to disappear, say 50 years after we've all gone, those in this room, it would still have an extraordinarily profound effect on us, not just because of the loss of our children and grandchildren's future. It would have an intellectual, destructive effect, bring, as it were, to naught all our aspirations. And in a way, a lot of religions in the past have simply grappled with those sorts of ideas, but have presented them in the ways that society could solve them. So they talked about spirituality and those kinds of things. We are in a world which is slightly challenged. People say that scientists will say, we're getting near the end of the Holocene period of geology, which has served us well for 10 to 12,000 years. And we're now moving into the Anthropocene period, where we are the environmental causality of our own existence or our own destruction. Who knows? And so we've come into the position of being almost godlike without any understanding in the sacred sense of what the planet is here for, in a much broader idea. And in that way, I do think we need to be widening our faith base. In other words, we need a bit more faith in the natural world as being a sacred place that we genuinely value, not just for light entertainment. I mean, if we genuinely believed in that things were sacred, animism rather than animalism, believed that everything was sacred. And in a way, if we had those thoughts, we might advance not only ideas of the existence of God, but we would advance it alongside a huge shift in terms of obligation. If we have an obligation to the world as being a sacred place, we have an obligation to retreat, so to speak, in so many parts of the world where we are not doing very much good, and indeed threatening our own survival to boot. I think when something is lost, I mean, we recently read about the loss of the Yangtze dolphin, and it's lost forever. And I thought that was an extraordinarily painful event, which Aristotle would say would affect all our sense of flourishing. Thank you. I was going to read you a couple of poems, but I'm not sure. I have time for 2 poems.
We always have time for
We always have time. Well, there are 2 poems which I think rather sort of pass the ideas in Simon's camp, or a more spiritual camp, for shorthand. I'll give Philip Larkin, I'm sure Simon knows it. It's just an extract from a poem called The Bad, which is the idea of the early morning. Philip Larkin, who was a pretty miserable old toad, who was considering his own demise. He said, he was talking about religion, he said that vast moth-eaten musical brocade created to pretend we never die, and specious stuff that says no rational being can fear a thing it will not feel, not seeing this is what we fear. No sight, no sound, no touch or taste or smell, nothing to think with, nothing to love or link with, the anaesthetic from which none come round. I think that's the end of the road in the humanist world. Let's try Horace Thomas, Via Negativa, where he talks about the idea, which is contained in that title, that you can only discuss the ethereal in the negative form because you don't have any personal knowledge. He said, why no, I never thought other than that God is that great absence in our lives, the empty silence within, the place where we go seeking, not in hope to arrive or find. He keeps the interstices in our knowledge, the darkness between stars. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Right, John, if you'd like to take a few minutes to respond.
Don't take long, I agree with everything he said. Except one thing, and that is that I and other humanists don't think what he said is important. Now, he said a lot of different things, I love the points, but I'm just going to come in on 2 things. Firstly, patients sometimes say to me, I've lived my life and now you tell me I'm going to die. Well, what's all that about? That's a bloody waste of time. Great philosophical, metaphysical question. I asked one of our chaplains what he would say to that patient. And he said, well, I would tell him about God. And I said, well, if you didn't believe in God, it was a long pause. He said, well, I'd tell him about God. And really, it is very interesting. And those of us who conduct funerals like myself, I sometimes see people before they die talk about what their life meant to them. I'm not going to go into some detail, but there's no doubt at all that instead of an afterlife in heaven or the other place, we live on genes, but also in the way we influence people. So my mother influenced me in some really good ways, and I influenced my children, and they influenced their children. So there's a bit of my mother spreading out over time and generations. My mother is immortal. All right? So that's what I'm going to say about the afterlife. The other thing is this spirituality thing. Now, I am particularly interested in spirituality, particularly the neuroscience of spirituality. So let me just, I've got a couple of notes about this. Okay, so I think one of the big myths about humanism, we're rather dull, we lack that sense of the spiritual and wonder and all, but that's absolute nonsense. When I go into a European cathedral, I just feel, wow, this is unbelievable. I don't say there must be a God, but many people do. I just feel knocked sideways. It's designed to knock you. Many religious art, many religious music is designed to give you a tingle factor, to make you feel ecstatic. And what you feel these times is qualitatively different. You know, if I see something beautiful, I feel good. If I see something very beautiful, I feel very good. But sometimes it's a different order. You feel not only that thing's good, but the world is good, the world's wonderful. And you get a rush of and then you meet it, then it's chemistry that does it. So it's not just in religious art, but in nature and in secular art. And this all seems a bit otherworldly, but what's actually happening is in here, the beauty is not out there, it's in your perception of it. And there are parts of the brain that confer that, and people can lose their sense of awe and wonder if that part of the brain is damaged. So psychologists have studied this sense of awe and wonder and a spiritual sense about the world in great detail. You've got phenomenologists like William James, our own Alistair Hardy. You've got neuroscientists putting depth electrodes into the brain, functional MRI scanners. We can experience all sorts of ecstatic religious experiences during the course of epileptic seizures with drugs and so on. William James, in fact, experimented with drugs and had ecstatic religious experiences on them. He also took nitrous oxide, and he said it was only under nitrous oxide he could understand Hegel. But also spirituality is a variable, a biological variable. And again, the twin studies have shown that the degree to which you're spiritual is about 30–40% inherited. So it's something you're born with, but also people can acquire the spiritual centre in their life. So does it matter that you don't have to be religious to experience these transcendental feelings? Does it matter that a beautiful rainbow can be explained by refraction of light? Does it matter that neuroscientists have shown that many of our feelings, appreciation of art, the ecstasy, the tingle factors, are the result of electrochemical changes in the brain? Does it matter that spiritual experiences may be mediated by oxytocin? Does it matter that spiritual experiences can be produced by drugs or electrical stimulation of the temporal lobes? Does it matter that the awe and wonder, the transcendental experiences in here rather than out there? Does it matter that to some extent my spiritual experience is determined by my genes? None of these things matter. It is part of what it is to be human. This is our consciousness, our free will, our innate moral sense, and our compassion for others. These moments of wonder and awe are fantastic. The greatest show on earth. And they're free. Some get them more than others. Some people train themselves to have them. Some people meditate on a single petal and have a feeling of ecstasy. I think that's
Thank you. Right. Chris, would you like to say anything further to your points?
What Simon says is correct. It's not. We are a social animal, so how a lot of religions work is also is when they are containing people and giving them dealing possibly in hope and doubt and those sort of uncertainties where they do bad things, when they get bogged down with dogma and rigidity. And it's a question of place. I was in Rwanda recently, and a very beautiful country. It's been through just a little bit of a nightmare. And we visited the Genocide Museum there, which is, I'm sure you all know the general story. Something like 800,000 people were slaughtered in a sort of uprising of slaughter that just went off across the entire country. And the Centre to remember this has been put together with an extraordinary degree of honesty and openness without emphasising any blame or without being sentimental. But with those sorts of thoughts in my mind, I was wandering in some of the back streets of the capital, and I came across a little Baha'i place of worship. Baha'is are quite a recent religion which kicked off in Persia, and we went in and had a little bit of chat with people there, and they were very pleased to see us, and they were building their own sense of worth within that particular community. And because we've been to Haifa, we were able to talk to them about the Baha'i Centre there and its gardens, and the tomb of their leader, which is at Accra, just along the coast of Haifa. And I thought it was amazing that they would meet people who'd been to their spiritual significant places, such as we had, and we signed a business book and all the rest of it. And I thought, in the context of today's meeting, I thought, well, what was I supposed to say to these people in the context of what the country had been through, and to try and imagine myself there, trying to put a humanist gloss on it. I don't think I would be able to even speak on it, to be honest, because to tell people who experience these kinds of things, don't worry, we can work it all out for ourselves, I'm not sure that's sufficient.
Thank you. Right. So now we come to the part of the meeting where you get a chance to enter into the dialogue by asking questions of our three speakers. Now, if you could please, A, speak up, B, just say who you are, and C, keep your questions short, and D, address it to one or to any of the one or two that you want to. And we've got about a half an hour or so for questions, so I would like to sort of throw the floor open for people who put their hand up. I'll try and take you in the order I see you. Pam?
Yes, I'm Pam Pink, and I'm in the philosophy of social change group. A friend said to me, I want to be religious, I love religion, I love going to church, I love all that about it, but I can't accept it because my reason tells me that it's not true. And there are people, I think, who have an emotional dependence on religion, and I'm saying to myself, well, why not? It is harmful that they have this dependence on religion.
And who would you like to address that to?
Well, any of them.
Right. Simon, would you like to sort of say a few?
Okay, well, this touches on something somebody else said earlier, and that is that religion does provide many social benefits. For example, ceremonies, although humans now provide ceremonies. Also provides community, and it provides somewhere you can go on Sunday and sing hymns and have an edifying discussion, sermon. And what's not to like about that? And many people, when they lose their faith, they do miss that. You must remember that half of the people who call themselves Christians, in fact, aren't believing Christians, but are cultural Christians. I love Christianity. So I think in a way, if we're not going to have churches as the centres of community, we have to try and replace it. And I think this is very important. So instead of staying at home and all watching our own televisions, not even going to the cinema anymore, we ought to try and actually be proactive and get together. And this is something in our humanist group we're actually debating at the moment and discussing. We're talking about, for example, having a Sunday morning brunch where we get together. It'll be a little bit of discussion and friendliness, but it'll be a social thing. And things like that, that will be a regular meeting and provide some of the benefits of religion. Because we are, as I say, a religiosity, again, is a human variable that is to some extent inherited. So all of us, there'll be most people around who feel drawn to that sense of the spiritual and will want to meet with other people the same. Yeah, so I think we ought to think about the sort of society we want in the absence of religion.
Mike, would you like to say anything to that question?
Yes, briefly. Much the same thing as Simon says. I grew up in church of England. My uncle's a priest, and I can see that there is a lot in there. The ritual and everything else is very nice. I agree with Simon that you can have that ritual, you can have everything without the actual religious elements. But I would also like to actually point out that if you've got this emotional dependence, where did that come from? I don't think that is genetic. I don't think it's immoral. I think it's the way you've been brought up that's imparted that to you to a certain extent. Yes, human beings have a need, have an innate desire for ritual of some sort, but the actual religious part of that, I would say, is something that's probably been imparted by the way you live, and whether that's a good thing or not is debatable.
Thank you, Chris?
Well, I suppose if you gather together on the traditional Sunday with others, the point is to be gathering together with an idea of some sort of collective aspiration or belief, and as you say, your friend is sitting there thinking, what on earth am I doing here? I don't know quite how humanism focused that down to anything, or open it up to everything, I mean, depending on how you view that spiritual place. But it needs a lot of working on, and unfortunately we're asked not to follow God, but to follow GDP instead, and get out there and shop until we drop, and these things are being lost as a result.
Thank you. I think Mark was having a question to ask.
I'm not ready to ask a question, and I'm also trying to resist extemporising, because if I do that, I'll take far more than 5 minutes that I'm supposed to be allowed. But it does mean that these few thoughts I prepared earlier can be distributed to the speakers so they can tear them to pieces at their convenience. Humanism seems to me to be not a philosophical position as such. It's more a world view in which man, characterised as distinct in essence from the rest of nature and not God, is at the centre. God is excluded as a matter of principle in the humanist view, but some characteristically religious language of moral and spiritual values is admitted. Explanatory narrative is admitted, but not as derived from sacred revelation. Socrates, whose picture we have on the flyer, was a Christ-like figure. He was convicted and condemned to death for critical teaching about the Athenian gods. And then he was killed some 400 years before the birth of Jesus. But he was not an atheist. In Plato's Republic, Socrates explains in his foundation myth how justice and morality, in his view, must be anchored beyond the margins of rationality and fact. Julian Huxley, whose picture is on the flyer, was the first president of the British Humanist Association between 1963 and 1965. He described himself as an evolutionary humanist. He remained, surprisingly, an enthusiast for eugenics. For example, and I'm quoting him, to discourage genetically defective or inferior types from breeding, but long after most people had changed their minds about this, under the popularity of the idea had diminished in the 20 years since World War II, when news of the Nazi death camps reached the public ear. Julian Huxley said that man's destiny is to be the sole agent for the future evolution of this planet. In his view, humanism is a religion without revelation. He said that there is a general mystery lying behind our existence in the universe, and in that space, humanism should explore the relationship between man, the world of fact, value, and her individualized self. Stephen Fry, whose picture is also on the flyer, is a patron of Humanist UK. He was condemned earlier this year for blasphemy. Apparently he responded to a question on Irish TV by asking, "Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who created a world which is so full of injustice and pain?" The Telegraph reported on May the 10th that the Garda had dropped their investigation into Stephen Fry because no person had been injured. So Stephen Fry had no need to take stock of his hemlock. The philosopher Karl Popper, previously a member of the British Humanist Association Advisory Council, may or may not be right that scientific propositions cannot be derived by inductive logic from the facts around us. But it seems pretty clear that neither eugenics nor liberal values such as are reflected in the aspirations of Humanist UK have sprung directly from observation of the material world. Perhaps humanism should properly be viewed not as an alternative to religion, but indeed as an alternative religion. In Metaphysics as a Guide to Morals, Iris Murdoch observes, and I'm quoting, "If we have been touched by religion, our minds are likely to be full of readily available religious imagery, which there is no need to expel simply because, as may be, we do not believe in God. Humanists do not have God, but they do have pastoral care and ceremonies for naming babies, for weddings and for funerals. Their inspiration comes from a particular view of the Enlightenment, manifestly a different view from that of John Gray, for example, a non-humanist philosopher, rather than from a sacred fount of revelation. In other words, the Enlightenment, not sacred sources. As an alternative religion, humanists would find themselves in the company of non-theist Quakers, Buddhists, Hindus, Jains, Confucians, Taoists, also a scattering of Neo-Druids and Jedi Knights. They would not be alone, and unlike Socrates, could rejoice in the protection of conscience in the Equality Act 2010, so that hemlock would not be a risk for them.
Right. Well,
I'd like to have a go at that.
that was. I'll take it as a very long question. I hope the
lots
answer
of shibboleths and myths coming up here. Really, I don't know where you dredged all that stuff. But John Gray and John Scruton, Roger Scruton, I know. Okay. Firstly, let's get rid of a few things. Eugenics. Okay. There's good eugenics and there's bad eugenics. Most doctors are desperately in favour of eugenics. I have a family with Huntington's chorea. They're desperately trying to make sure that none of their offspring will also have that gene. All right? Many people, not all, would terminate a pregnancy very early if it was going to be a child with severe malformation or even Down syndrome, which isn't that severe. This is eugenics. All right? So, obviously, involuntary eugenics, forcing people, sterilising people against their will, that's a no-brainer. Okay, so just get to eugenics in proportion. Is humanism a religion? Clearly it's not. I explained earlier what virtually everybody considers a religion to be. Humanism does not tick any of the boxes. Now, obviously, religions have provided many useful services for the communities and individuals, and those need to be replaced. So the fact we do baby naming ceremonies and weddings and funerals doesn't make us a religion. Humanists are liberal. Well, tell us a bit what you mean by liberal. There is a huge spectrum among humanists, from people quite right-wing, Brexiters, and quite right-wing conservatives, right through to people at the far end of socialism. The humanist movement is very careful to have very limited requirements. Basically, you have to believe in naturalism, morality, and the sort of values we derive from that. There's no requirement to have any particular political view. If you mean sort of philosophical liberalism, yeah, I think most people who think about the world, think about the human condition, tend to have an inquiring mind and are open to new experiences, which is one of the cardinal features of liberalism. What other things were you saying? Stephen Fry, that was very interesting. Karl Popper, very interesting. I think, any other points that you...
Let's take another question or two from the rest of the people, and maybe your answer will come from that. So, I've done gentleman there and then Greg. Yes, you.
Okay, my name's Terry. I'm slightly French, existential roots, and English modern college.
Speak up.
2 points I'd like to bring to the conversation. First of all, why do you need a name? Surely when you give a name to yourself, you're saying we are these and we are not to them. I'm just interested that humanists think that they need to be a name. That makes me think that they do have a belief system. And secondly, I have been to several humanist meetings. One of them was about climate change. And it was quite interesting, this one, because the guy who's in charge, he basically said, this is a very complicated subject. I have a book here with lots of evidence in it. Right? It's very complicated, you lot really want to understand. But believe me, I can translate it for you. This is what it means. Right? And what does that remind you of? A humanist. It's a religion. Humanists now are becoming basically priests for science. I've worked in science all my life. I'm a microbiologist and I worked in the food industry. We put salt, we put nitrate in things because it was good for us. That was the science of the day. We take them out, we put other things in at the moment because it's good for us. That's the science of today. Anybody will tell you science doesn't know everything. They know the best thing at the time. However, in the future, we don't know what we're doing now is either positive or negative. That leads me to believe that humanism is a religion and it does have priests. Don't like what people think.
And if you like Simon to address that last point. Yes?
Okay. Right. Well, just because you believe something doesn't make you a religion. I mean, you have to have faith, you have to tick all the other boxes for religion. So I can't see how you make it a religion. It's a non-religious worldview. Now, you and several other people have said, why do you need to get together? Why can't you just be a good person, lead a good life on your own? You know what to do. And that's exactly what my kids say. I've got 4 kids, none of them are religious, and they all say, no, I'm not going to join. I don't join stuff. I just get on with my own life. That is absolutely fine. I have great sympathy with that, particularly as they don't want to give you the satisfaction of joining. Typical kids. So, but most of us accept that the world is not exactly perfect. And if we're going to change it, we can't do it on our own. So we tend to join with like-minded people. We join Amnesty International, Jubilee Debt Campaign, Justice Now, Greenpeace. We join organisations to join with others to make a change. I have joined Humanist Movement because they have campaigns that I think are very important for the community. And also I've joined them because I am keen that people out there should not call themselves atheists. 50% of the population have no religion. And if you say, well, do you believe this? Oh, I don't believe anything. That's not true. They do have beliefs and positive values. And I think it's important that they recognise those and allow those ideas to flourish. I'm also keen that those who live without religion are not perceived in a bad way by religious people. I don't know whether you know, but in 30 countries of the world, humanism, any form of atheism, is against the law, and in 13 of those countries, it has the death sentence. All right? There's only one country in the world where Christianity has the death sentence, which is
America.
No, North Korea. North Korea. Any religion found with a Bible or Quran, you're just killed straight away. So many people, particularly fundamentalists, are very frightened of secularism and modernity. And in fact, the main reason that religion fundamentalism has arisen is a reaction to just those things. So, for example, in America, Protestant fundamentalism arose as a reaction to a secular government. It's the same in Israel. The ultra-right Orthodox Jews was a reaction to a secular government. It's the secular governments of Persia under the Shah, the secularization of Egypt under Nasser, of Turkey under Ataturk, that caused people to fear and develop fundamentalism. So if more people are going to become non-religious, it's very important we engage with religious people and reassure them that we're fighting for their rights to live as they wish. So our humanist group, we have a very big movement to try and get into interfaith groups and faith groups and to join with them on joint endeavours, but also to reassure them that we're not against them.
Right. Another question.
Can I?
Oh yes, okay.
I have to disagree with some to a certain extent, because when he says humanism ticks all the boxes, or doesn't tick the boxes, I ask, well, who actually designed those boxes? And secondly, it doesn't matter really about those boxes. We're told about those boxes by politicians all the time. It's how people actually feel. And I would certainly say that many people feel that humanism is a religion. And that's, I think, far more important than ticking one particular set of boxes that probably were chosen by humanists.
Okay, can we have another question from the floor? Sorry. Oh yeah, Chris. Okay.
To some extent, we're just still turning on the head of the pin about does God mean anything to you, or does it not mean anything to you? And the almost near obsession of humanism to say whatever else we do, we must keep saying that we don't believe in this particular attitude to religion. We just don't take that on board. And I don't see the necessity for it. I mean, there are a lot of organisations that do, generally speaking, good works, Oxfam, all the rest of it. They don't seem to have to start off by saying whatever's motivating us, it isn't God, or it isn't a disbelief in God. It just seems to me to be slightly, I don't see the relevance of it in the end. I mean, what you do and who you link with to promote a better world is simply how you engage and go in which direction you like. And if you want to help poverty in Africa, you can support particular organisations. You don't need to declare, in a sense, whether you're motivated by this or that belief if it isn't significant. What is significant is the consequence. It's the consequence of our limited attitude to the natural world, as I mentioned before, that leads to its partial destruction. It's the consequence of what you believe that people see. That's the important bit. If you're leading a good life, that's self-evident. Do I need to know why? I'm not sure.
Right? Okay, I still have Patrick.
We haven't talked much about groups, and it seems pretty clear to me that most religions are about groups and belonging in that group, and jolly well making sure that other groups are disadvantaged as a result of the power that group holds. I wonder how humanists are going to cope with that or manage that if we accept that actually one of our attributes as humans is that we really do want to belong to a group, whether it's a football group or a humanist group. And humanism, it seems to me, perhaps is going to have difficulty with this because it tends to be very much about how I feel as an individual.
Is that a question to Simon?
I guess, yes.
Okay, so like-minded people get together to form a group, okay, and they are like-minded, and people who don't share their views don't join the group. That's a sort of fairly natural enterprise and occurs in many social circumstances. Of course, if they then gang up against another group, that's not a good thing. Humanists do have a number of specific challenges to some of the things in the world and in this country as well. We, for example, campaign against the appalling, I would consider appalling system of faith schools. A third of all government-funded schools are religious, and that doesn't reflect the beliefs of the parents, certainly of the children. And we have really two countries in the world where religious leaders are as of right in the government, and one of them is Iran, and the other is England. And there are other things that we. So you could say we're proactive on that sense, but we do it through the normal channels, legal representation and so on. I'm not sure what you've got against people forming groups. It's the way things get done.
Except that a lot of groups are trying to influence others in other groups.
Okay, so we're trying to change things throughout the whole world. Yes, we want the world for a better place. If you go on the BHA website, you'll see probably about a dozen campaigns against homeopathy, for example. Well, against the NHS funding. We've got nothing against people who want to use homeopathy. So there are many different projects, but we are not against religion. People can think whatever they like. We don't have thought police. Think pod. Remember thought crime in 1984? We don't stop people thinking what they want, and they can do and say whatever they like within the usual limits, which are concerned with harm to others. That's absolutely fine. We support the rights. We're actually fighting very hard on behalf of the Muslim community at the moment because they're getting such bad press. I mean, in America, it's horrendous. So I hope we're not harmful to others, and I hope we're trying to do the right thing. If you think we're harmful to somebody, tell me in what way.
Mike or Chris?
Yes, just quickly. I think I tend to agree that groups are natural. People will always want to form groups. And the groups that we have been talking about, the humanists and the Animalism, are, from my point of view, a sort of old-fashioned form of group. Because I spend so much time online, and my son's still with me, living with us, who's likes computer games and spends all his time online. I'm perhaps slightly closer to what the younger generation are doing at the moment. And they, of course, are forming groups, but they form groups all over the place. I'm in groups with sort of a middle-aged woman who was born in Sudan and lives in Denmark, with a young Moroccan guy, with all these different people talking about lots of different things. So I'm not concentrated. I'm in groups on all sorts of subject matters, with people all over the world, and my son and people younger than him, even more so. So the number of groups is exploding. Before you didn't have that much choice. You want to be with people like yourself. You're restricted to the ones immediately around you. If there's nobody like that around you, you're in a group of one. You're not really a group, but now that doesn't matter because there's going to be somebody somewhere that's like you. You're going to be in a group. So I think you agree. Humans naturally form groups, but these sort of large, all-encompassing groups, I think, are probably more on their way out and being replaced by smaller groups, which still can be very divisive. Still can. But the only counter to that is they tend not to be the be-all on everybody. Somebody isn't just a member of that group and nothing else. They tend to be a member of lots of different groups.
Yes?
Good morning, my name's John. I'm a local who lives in Frankwell, originally Australian. I just wandered down just to have a bit of a listen this morning. recently I woke up and discovered I was a humanist, so always seemed very interested in discussion. Very recently, Saudi Arabia gave human rights to a robot. I was just wondering what the panel thought about that. Is that the thin edge of the wedge, or how things are going? Why on earth would Saudi Arabia, with such a horrific human rights record, do such a thing?
I never heard of this. So, sorry, what robot is this they gave a...
It was in the news a month or two ago that Saudi Arabia was the first country in the world to afford human rights to a robot.
And that's based, presumably, on something in the Quran.
I have no further knowledge on that.
Anybody know any more about that? I mean, it sounds a bit unusual. I think so. I'm a hard AI man, and I believe that there will come a time when computers will have personhood.
Right. Well, there's one that I think probably you may be the only person in the room who doesn't know anything about it. Right. Yes, here in front.
My name's Nick. I have paid my subs to the Shrewsbury Humanists, but whether I count as a humanist is another matter. I'd like to ask Simon to clarify something, please. Simon, you said that we are unlike most animals in that our behaviour is not innate but learned or acquired. And I have interpreted you correctly, I hope.
A matter of degree, yes.
Yes. But you also mentioned moral foundation theory, which is an aspect of humanism with which I have struggled so far. And that says, if I understand it properly, that moral foundations are, at least to some extent, innate rather than being acquired. There seems to be a dichotomy here. Could you clarify?
Yeah, you would have thought it's a bit of both. You see, this is a thought experiment. Supposing everybody thought differently about morals. Some people really believe it's a good thing to kill people, other people to be promiscuous, other people to be monogamous. We all thought differently. Some people respected parents, some didn't, okay? Then if you wanted to design a system of morality for everybody, it would be a nightmare. And in fact, it would probably just be anarchy, or worse still, the majority would try and impose their morals on the others or even kill the others. But it's not like that. Anthropologists, sociologists and psychologists have studied cultures and people from all over the world, and everybody believes in those morals I talked about in moral foundation theory: compassion, justice, obeying authority, in-group loyalty, taboos. Okay, we don't all follow those, unfortunately, but these are aspirations that everybody agrees about. So in a way, if you're going to have a moral system, it has to be based on what everybody agrees about. That's the first start. Somebody said, what happens if we meet animals from outer space? It's very unlikely they'll have the same morals. And what's right for them won't necessarily be right for us. And that's a very interesting thought experiment. Does that answer the question? I can't remember.
The question is whether moral foundations are innate.
Yes. Well, they are to some extent. I mean, if you look at the variation in morality, it's about 40% inherited, which means it's 60% influenced by your environment. But of course, if we have these instincts, it depends very much on the circumstances we're in. For example, we all feel empathy for other people, but the degree to which we feel empathy and the extent to which we feel it depends on our environment. In the Dark Ages, okay, people on the whole had empathy for their family, possibly people in their village, but outside everybody was probably trying to kill them, they didn't have empathy. Now we have an expanded circle of empathy because of our change in culture. People even feel empathy for people of a different colour in a different country, which was sort of unheard of in the old days. So culture affects how we express these things, yeah. So it's a combination of instinctive morality. And also we lose empathy very quickly. If we're under threat or frightened or drunk, angry or tired, we're less empathic. Well, I am.
Thank you.
Yes. The moral foundation with which I struggle is the innate respect for authority. I don't really understand what authority, legitimate authority is, where it comes from, but I can see a parallel between that feeling and the feeling that seems to draw people into organised religions in which they like to have thinking handed down to them rather than bother to do it for themselves.
Yeah. So you see it in animals, obviously, pecking order in birds and many animals. But in humans, this tendency varies. So, for example, the pattern of the moral foundations varies. Some people, everybody tends to have compassion and justice, to a largely similar degree. People on the right, okay, on the conservative philosophy, tend to be strong believers in authority, obeying authority, forming in-group loyalty, and they feel very strongly about taboos. People who are philosophically on the left believe in compassion and justice, but we don't like people telling us what we should do. We're suspicious of authority. We're suspicious of joining groups, and we don't like people telling us what we can and can't do with our bodies. I think you're a liberal. That's why you instinctively don't distrust authority. And the person who said, this book is very difficult, believe me, many of us would have said, arguing from authority, I don't like that at all. So we vary, and yeah.
I think your straight line, left-right, one-dimensional or description is simplistic.
Yes, it is. But in fact, the statistics hold up very well. It tells you one thing, and then one thing only. Life's more complicated, I agree, but it's interesting.
Yes?
My name's Catherine. I am, if anything, a Unitarian. I have a difficulty with it because it calls itself a church, but it is a church without any dogma, without any doctrine, without any hierarchy. It provides a sense of community, and I think, like humanism, it talks about what is and not what isn't. But that was not my question. My question was actually to Chris. You talked about when you were in Rwanda, yeah, and the Baha'is, and what you were going to say to them. What I felt when you were talking was a sense of distress and compassion, but I'm not sure what you were saying in relation to humanism or spirituality, and I wondered if you could expand on that.
I suppose I was thinking that if I was going to try and tackle the faith of those particular people, humanism wouldn't be the basis of a challenge.
With anything else?
Well, no, nothing else. I respect that people will find their way in their own way, but to suggest that somehow you've got it all wrong, mate, and you really should be give up on this and come to your senses, I don't think is the right approach. I'm not suggesting Simon is disrespectful to other religions, but there is an inherent presumption there in humanism that everybody else has kind of got it slightly wrong, it seemed to me. And in a place that has experienced the upheaval and consequences of relying a little bit too much on humanity, you might say. And having been so badly let down, I felt they needed to, the finding of compassion with each other within that kind of framework, which just happened to be a bit higher, was too valuable to challenge.
But I don't think humanists would have any argument with that, would they?
Sorry?
I don't think humanists would have any argument with that, would they?
Well, maybe,
providing their faith.
I think by inference of the God doesn't mean anything, I think they do.
Well, God means a lot to other people. I choose to live my life without God, and humanists do the same, but we accept that these ideas are very important to other people. My brother is the vicar of the Church of England, and he is a fantastic guy, and I support him in his work, and I know many of his Christian friends, and I really respect them. I think that at the end of the day, their beliefs are based on a false premise, but I admire their beliefs and the work they do. I think humanists are being painted as a little bit like angry atheists. And that is what I want to discourage. I mean, to be honest, there are a few in our group who verge that way. There are some like me who are much more accepting. We've got a few people who are definitely severely Islamophobic. And that is a shame. But it's probably good that we have diversity so that we can discuss things. I think if you're too exclusive, then well, it's not good for local free society.
Another question. I'll take the gentleman behind you right then. Yes?
Hi, my name's Stuart. I would like to ask Simon to make some comments about emotion. It hasn't really... I would just like to hear your take on how you see emotions. You talked about people's religious experiences and various transcendental experiences, and it seemed to me that all boils down to emotion. I'd like to hear your take on it.
Okay, so this is really asking a question with my neurology hat on than humanist, so I don't want to spend too long on this. I mean, emotions are usually relatively straightforward things like fear, and anger, and joy, and lust, and what have you. And they vary in degree, and they're stimulus related. The ecstatic experience you get, the transcendental experience you get, seems to be qualitatively different because it is out of proportion to the stimulus. Something is more beautiful, but at a certain point, whoop, you slip over into something else. And the evidence suggests that different parts of the brain and different chemicals are triggered in. And it's a wonderful experience. And you know, those of you who have had tingle factors with certain pieces of music, or you just sometimes say, God, isn't it wonderful to be in this incredible world? This is just, whoa, you feel there's something greater than yourself. It's a trick your brain's playing on you, but it's wonderful. So I think there's a difference, between just stimulus-sensitive emotion and transcendental sensation. Not everybody does. Some people say that spiritual experiences are just emotions that are at one extreme. I think they're different qualitatively, and neuroscience would suggest so as well.
Mary Jane, will take you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'd like to thank the gentleman on that. I've forgotten your name on the front row. I was going to pick up on exactly the same thing. And with a background of playing and learning with very young children, the idea of an innate moral compass, I would question, because it was two words you mentioned, compassion and justice, that I think we all learn that. Have I got the wrong end of the stick?
We do learn it, but it's there waiting to be learnt, like a language. They hear a language and it kicks in, and the programs that we've evolved to use language kick in. I mean, the first thing kids yell when they can is, "It's not fair!" They have a strong sense of fairness in that experience. And also, they have a sense of compassion and love. It's not something they're taught.
I haven't done it for a long time. I have to say that we do teach young children.
You do.
Compassion and justice. But when you said innate, I hadn't thought of that before. When you explained that it was there, waiting to be developed. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're getting close to the time for us to finish. I'll take one more question if there is one. Yes?
My name is Shropshire and I'm a Muslim living in Shrewsbury for the past 2 years. In the entire debate, the word power hasn't been mentioned at all. And compassion, power is the only thing that kills compassion.
The word power hasn't been mentioned.
Anything about it?
And it is what kills compassion.
And especially considering the recent Rohingya Muslims, where children were thrown in the fire.
Okay.
Babies were thrown in the fire.
With power must come responsibility. Power can be used for good. Power can be things as well. How do we ensure that individuals and communities and whole countries use power responsibly? It's one of the greatest challenges we have. And ideologies are sometimes the fuel that's been poured on the fire. If you have a utopian vision, if you believe the world would be an infinitely better place if everybody was communist or everybody was Christian, then a bit of suffering now doesn't really matter. Killing a few people now doesn't matter because the end result is going to be so wonderful. So that's why people who have fundamentalist or utopian visions are so dangerous. Or people who, of course, use power badly because they're narcissistic psychopaths. Not naming any names.
Okay, I'll take just one question for Simon, and that is that it seems to me that if you're an individual who the circumstances of your life have led you to feel completely defeated by what you've experienced, does humanism offer you some sort of solace in those circumstances?
That's a very, very interesting question. So supposing somebody is in a state of despair, depression, existential angst, and something like that, who should they turn to for help? Well, most of us turn to our family and friends, and that usually serves us well. But some people have problems greater than that. I wouldn't come to your humanist group and ask for help. You would certainly get companionship and support, but probably no more than you would from your family and friends. I wouldn't go to your vicar, myself, unless he's an exceptional person who's studied psychology. You need help. In those circumstances, you need conventional help. I would suggest that person went to the general practitioner, who's a very good person to direct you towards sometimes medication, sometimes psychotherapy, sometimes something more. But there are a few of us who at some time in our life haven't been through those sort of experiences. And there are many different things that can provide that. Humanism is not a counselling service. Although we do meet together on a regular basis and drink beer, which is a sort of thing.
Right. Okay. I just asked Mark to give a very brief sort of where he thinks we have reached a point as a result of this meeting.
Mr. Marjorie, that's an impossible question, really. If we are, on the question of whether we've elucidated humanism at all, I think Simon's told us that humanists believe in the laws of nature and they deny the supernatural. They say that morality is substantially intuitive, the principles are hardwired into our brains, but we do have a reflective capacity beyond our instincts, and we can have spiritual experiences, but we're definitely not a religion, he says. Mike, on the other hand, says humanism is morphing into a scientific recognition of our nature as animal machines. He says artificial intelligence can augment our given nature, and that humanism wrongly discriminates in favour of the human. He says that a belief system such as humanists have is limiting and unnecessary. He says humanism is a religion. Chris, who comes from a religious perspective, says that there is something beyond the materialistic. There is something which he says is sacred. There is a layer of meaning which is beyond science. He says that the concept of death being the complete end diminishes the meaning of life. He says that man is liable to become godlike while lacking any overriding sense of purpose, that we need religion, and it's there.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you all for coming. I hope you found it interesting and illuminating. Many thanks to Simon and to Mike and to Chris for and many thanks to those of you who contributed deferring the cost of the venue. And with that, I'll say good afternoon to you.